Hello folks, this is Bill Delperdange from Preserving Our Baptist History, and I wanted to give you an update on some of our upcoming projects so that you know what's going on. Got a few things coming up soon. I want to cover Severns Valley Baptist Church. That is the first continuously existing Baptist church that was established west of the Allegheny Mountains, and that was established June 17th, 1781. John Gerard was the founding pastor there. John Gerard was a pastor only for 11 months of that church. He also helped establish a couple of other churches in this area. The reason his tenure as pastor was so short was because after 11 months he went out hunting for food for his family one evening and was captured by Indians, and later we believe he was put to death. So he was killed by the Native Americans that lived in this region, and but that church, it was right near where we live here in Shepherdsville, Kentucky. It was established in Elizabethtown, which is just a few miles down the road, and we're going to visit the locations of the original church, which is in what's now the Elizabethtown Cemetery, and then also a short time after that, in the early 1800s, they actually had a brick building that still stands today. It is being used by the Shriners now, but the building still exists, and there's a historical marker there. So we're going to visit that, and we're going to see some of the things that John Gerard did and the Severns Valley Baptist Church. Another thing that's coming up is next month I'm going to be doing a trip to North Carolina. And when we do that, we're going to stop in Valdese, North Carolina, where we're going to visit the Trail of Faith Museum, which tells the story of the Waldenses. The Waldenses are predecessors of the Baptists. They believed like we do, at least for the most part. There might be some variations, and of course, this was a group that has existed for almost a couple of thousand years. They technically still exist today, although they don't believe today what they did prior to 1532. But they have existed, they believe, since the time of the apostles. I personally agree with that view, although sometimes they were called by different names. They were called Donatists and Paulicians and Albigenses, but essentially they held the same doctrine. And we'll visit the museum there, and we'll see some replicas of their dwellings and their school that was in existence over there in northern Italy, and we'll discuss that. Unfortunately, I won't be able to travel to Italy at this time to film over there, but perhaps in the future. That will probably be a multi-part episode. It won't be just one part. It will be several different parts, perhaps 15 to 30 minutes each, and we'll talk about the Waldenses and their history, what they accomplished, what they did, what they stood for, and most importantly, what they suffered for the cause of Christ. So we'll be doing that. I'll be starting work on that next month. Another history segment that I want to touch on is John Wycliffe. Now, John Wycliffe was not exactly a Baptist, he was the first one to translate the Bible into English, so it was important to us, and he had some dealings with a group called the Lollards. Many people believe that the Lollards were followers of Wycliffe, but they actually existed before Wycliffe began his work. So they trace their origins back to an individual by the last name of Lollard, and his followers, many of them were what we would consider Baptists today. However, especially after the time of Wycliffe, many of them descended into what was more or less Protestantism. So we'll talk about that. We'll talk about the work of Wycliffe, what he did to translate the Bible into English. His was one of the first steps in bringing the Bible to the people of England in the King James Version of the Bible, and so it was very important to the history of the English Bible. Okay, another thing that we have planned is while we're in North Carolina next month, we're going to also go to the Sandy Creek Baptist Church. The Sandy Creek Baptist Church was established by Shubal Stearns back in the early 1800s, and Shubal Stearns was he was a convert of George Whitefield during the First Great Awakening here in America, and he preached all through the South and established churches. The Sandy Creek Baptist Church is called the mother of all Baptist churches, and they established many Baptist churches all across the South, and it's the reason that the South is often called the Bible Belt to this day. But Shubal Stearns and his brother-in-law Daniel Marshall were very important to our history. In fact, Shubal Stearns is one of those names that if you're a Baptist in America, you really need to know the name of Shubal Stearns because he had so much of an influence on who we are today. Another church in North Carolina that I want to visit is the Jersey Settlement Baptist Church, which was established by John Gano. John Gano, if you watch our other episode that we did about him, he was the one who is given credit for baptizing George Washington. So he's important to our history as well, and so we're going to visit that church and talk a little bit about the history of that and the part that John Gano played in establishing that church. Another project we have coming up is take a look at the history of the King James Bible and where it comes from. So even if you hold a different view on Bible versions, you'll still find this interesting and useful information because we're going to touch on just where our Bible comes from and how it was translated into English. Those who have gone before us to bring us the Bible in English. We'll talk about John Wycliffe, which we mentioned earlier. We'll talk about William Tyndale. We'll talk about others. We'll talk about the influence that the Waldenses had upon the English Bible as well, because they were very important to it as well. They preserved many of the manuscripts that were used to translate the King James Bible, and so they're important to our history as well. We'll have many more studies of our history coming up, and I hope you'll join us. I hope you'll stick with this channel. Please like and subscribe and do all those things. If you want to make a contribution to help keep us on the air, you can do that through our PayPal site as well. And just we also now have a Spreadshirt store if you want to get any paraphernalia to support our channel as well. Remember, this is preserving our Baptist history, and it's important that we remember where we come from so that we don't lose what we have. I hope you'll have a great day in church this weekend and continue to join us and check back often because we'll always be posting new stuff.